It's October 2025, and what's a better time and place to try your first ocean cruise than the Bay of Biscay in late autumn? My ship for this 7-day cruise round the Bay of Biscay is the P&O MV Arcadia. Built in Italy by Fincantieri in their shipyard in Marghera on the mainland of the Venetian lagoon between 2003 and 2004, and launched on the 26th of June 2004, making her 21 years old at the time of sailing. Originally constructed for Holland America, a shuffle around in orders at parent company Carnival Line saw her being fitted out as a vessel for Cunard before the last minute change of plans and being passed over to P&O. At 83,342 gross tonnes, 289.9 metres long, 32.2 metres wide and with 11 decks, she's the second smallest ship in P&O's fleet. But given my previous experience of cruising have all been on cruise ferries, the Arcadia is still much bigger. For comparison, my first Hertha trip was on the MS Lofoten, 32 times lighter, barely a quarter of the length, less than half the width, and with only 4 passenger decks. Whilst flagged in Bermuda, the Arcadia has its home port in Southampton, and on a miserably wet mid-October Sunday, that's where we boarded the ship for a trip that should have seen us visiting A Coruña, Gijón and Santander in Spain, along with Cherbourg in France. Though as time would soon show, that wasn't going to be the actual plan, as at the same time as we were boarding, the Met offices in most of Western Europe were eyeing up a rapidly developing low in the Atlantic, which was heading straight for the English Channel and the North Sea. Eventually named Benjamin by Météo France on the Wednesday, its effects would be felt not just across the coast of England, France, Belgium, Germany and the Netherlands, but also Spain, which means it was heading, at the same time as us, to the Bay of Biscay. The Bay of Biscay, also known as the Gulf of Gascony in France, is a large bay in Western Europe that forms the coastline of most of western France and the whole of northern Spain. Despite dropping to nearly 5,000 metres as its lowest point, it is, on the whole, surprisingly shallow, with the European continental shelf extending far out into the bay. With the shallow waters, the storms that blow into the bay are magnified as previously smaller waves are pushed up in the similar effect of a tidal wave. The Bay of Biscay is home to some of the Atlantic Ocean's fiercest weather, abnormally high waves, and until recent years the regular graveyard of merchant vessels foundering in terrifying Biscay storms. All in all, the Bay of Biscay is not an area of water you want to be messing around in. But hey, what's the worst that can happen on a, checks notes, 21-year-old cruise ship? We'd been able to board early, so before our official departure time, I was able to have an explore around the ship whilst it was still relatively empty. Fully loaded, the Arcadia can be home to up to 2,094 passengers and 866 crew. Starting up at the Crow's Nest bar high on deck 10, I then made my way down in the panoramic glass lifts, that looked like they could do with a seriously good clean, to the main deck of the ship, deck 3. The main atrium of the ship is pretty much in the centre and spans over decks 1, 2 and 3. With each floor being home to a mixture of bars, restaurants, shops, and on the lower deck the ship's reception desks. In a brief lull in the weather, whilst it was only drizzling slightly rather than absolutely bucketing it down, I headed out along the promenade deck to the non-pointy end or stern of the ship to take in the not necessarily beautiful sights of the port of Southampton and Southampton Water. The weather closed in again around 4 p.m. just as the crew slipped our moorings and the tugboat, assisted by the bow thrusters, gently manoeuvred us out into the channel of Southampton water and a very slow sail down from the furthest berthing point for cruise ships in the city towards the mouth of the River Itchen and the Solent. Passing along the way, the red funnel terminal for ferries making the much shorter voyage, the 11 miles to Cowes on the Isle of Wight, though all of those achieving that journey time significantly quicker than our very genteel pace of this first part of the cruise. In fact, most of those ferries would have been able to do at least one full round trip before we finally started our sail past of Queen Victoria's holiday island, thankfully in a gap in the rain showers, meaning it was possible to head out on deck to take in the views of the northeast coast of Thetis, with the Osborne House just about visible through the murk, standing out on top of the cliffs. A little while later we passed for Wootton Creek, home to Fishbourne, the main car ferry port on the island, and then in the distance the bright lights of Ryde. With our course now set to pass round the island and set sail for the Bay of Biscay, and with night rapidly falling, these would be the last sight of land we'd see for nearly 36 hours. The following morning, with the wind already gusting at gale force 8 and waves happily exceeding 5 metres in height, we finally left the English Channel and made the slight turn far out of sight of the French island of Ussant that marks the northern perimeter of the Gulf of Gascony, as it's known here, marking our entrance into the swirling, churning pool of the Bay of Biscay. The entire day was at sea, just crossing the bay, with at times slight lulls before the winds and waves would pick up again, heading towards the 6-metre wave height and at points touching storm force 10 overnight, making walking around the ship increasingly difficult as the ground refused to stay put for more than a couple of seconds. Day 3, and it's not even dawn. In proof that Spain is probably in the wrong time zone, it's gone 8 a.m, and yet as we gently slide into port in Coruña on the Galician coast of northern Spain, it's still not light. At nearly 8.5 degrees west of the prime meridian, the far west of Spain is over 90 minutes behind natural time. Add on daylight saving, which was still in effect, and sunrise isn't until 9 a.m, and the sun reaches the highest point in the sky, noon, at 2:17 p.m. Coruña is a major cruise port on the Western European itineraries, being a convenient stop-off point at the southern end of the Bay of Biscay for cruises heading south towards Portugal and the Canary, Madeira or Azores Islands, or round into the Mediterranean. Consequently, we've arrived behind the Sky Princess, which we've been shadowing since Southampton, and had to settle for the overflow parking in the harbour. I've already visited Coruña, details of that video click the link in the top right, but in quick summary, built on the site of an ancient Celtic hill fort, Romans, Tower of Hercules built, one of the oldest still working lighthouses in the world, Vikings, Tower of Hercules becomes a fortress, 13th century town refounded, 15th century upgraded to city, 16th century new castle constructed, just in time to humiliate the English counter-armada, also upgraded to capital of Kingdom of Galicia, 17th century first repairs in over a millennia to the Tower of Hercules, 18th century humiliates Napoleon, 20th century lose capital status to the newly formed community of Galicia to Santiago de Compostela, 21st century now the richest region of Galicia, including the port handling 75% of all Galicia's trade and being home to Interdix, parent company of, amongst others, Zara. The central area of the old town of Coruña is located around the harbour, with its traditional buildings decorated by their glass-fronted balconies, providing the light and ability to take in nature of the balcony with the protection from the weather of the North Spanish coast and the Bay of Biscay. The balconies look out over both the harbour and the park. As well as the central Plaza de Maria Pita, the central square that's also home to the City Hall and a large number of cafes and restaurants that fill rapidly after the cruise ships dock. Slightly further down from the main square is the modern Garden of San Carlos, built originally as a defensive castle outside the walls in the 14th century and then attached to the city by further fortifications 2 centuries later. The space inside was declared a historic garden on the 9th of November 1944. from the walls of the former fortifications there are views out over the whole of the port of A Coruña, including back to both ships that were in port on that day. Departing the city a couple of hours later, quite a bit behind schedule, we sail past that castle built in the 16th century, Castello di Santo Anton, that, despite still being under construction and only manned by 2 companies of soldiers and a handful of artillery pieces, was able to defend the southern flank of the old town from attack by Francis Drake and the English in retaliation for the Spanish Armada. Within seconds of leaving port, the winds and rain that preceded Storm Benjamin started to close in on us, making the city almost invisible and heralding the next leg of our journey deeper into the Bay of Biscay towards Gijón and then Santander. A journey that we would never complete in full. Next time, we visit the largest city in Asturias, Gijón. Take in the city and bay from a viewpoint. And don't make it to Santander.